Hello. 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 Hey. Hello. Hello, everybody. Hey, it's Carl. Carl's opinion. Hey everybody, this is Carl from not there yet. Hold on. All right. Now it's Carl from Carl's Opinion. How you guys doing this afternoon? Got a special guest here today, Mr. Gerard Cote, Chief Hope Officer for the Sovereign Hope Ministries, Sovereign Hope Faith. It's an educational organization, and we'll be doing a live interview, and then we'll follow it up by a live call-in show. So I just want to thank everybody who's joining us today, and everybody who will be joining us later. Thank you so much. So without further ado, let's go ahead and cut right on over here. Okay. All right, Mr. Cote. Yeah, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Nice warm day.
Yeah, actually got a little warm. It's only going to be getting warmer now.
That's right.
And we were talking earlier, just before we went on live. You were telling me about the founding fathers and how their disdain for political parties and how they try to avoid having political parties when they started the country. So if you want to continue on with that, let our audiences know what you're thinking about.
Sure. So to back up a couple steps from that assertion, when the founders studied in the interim period after the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, okay, they were earnestly studying in the interim period to find out what they should do. So they already had a confederation, which was very weak, very ineffective, and they went to Philadelphia with the understanding that they needed to strengthen it and make it better. So Jefferson, who was one of the main architects of the Constitutional Convention and the studying, Jefferson was involved, but James Madison was the primary architect. All of the founders in their studies found out that democracies don't work. They're short-lived, and when they fail violently. And the reason is primarily majority rule. In a democracy, you have majority rule.
Tyranny of majority, as some people call it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jury of the majority, yes. So, and it can be as close as 51-49. So the 49% are ostensibly taken out of the equation. They're done. They have no more say. And that's one of the reasons it causes it to fail, because you get a lot of divisiveness and a lot of anger, and it builds up. So their viewpoint was to create a republic. And the fundamental difference, I hear a lot of people give me their version of a definition of a republic versus a democracy. Some say a republic is indirect rule, democracy is direct rule. Well, that's true. But you can have democracies that are indirect rule, and that's what some people are trying to overlay on the United States republic, because we are a republic. We may not act like one, but we are legally, officially a republic.
Right. We have representatives who vote on our behalf. The American people don't vote on every single issue in mass. We elect representatives to go, and then they vote on our behalf.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the most common version of the difference between a republic and a democracy. In a democracy, everybody does it themselves, and in a republic, it's indirect. But that's not the true definition. A true definition of a republic is that the rule is placed on the individual, and in a majority, the rule is placed on the group. So in a democracy, the group has the control or the authority. In a republic, the individuals.
And explain to me, at least, explain to our audience, when you say the individual has the authority.
Yes.
How do you have 330 million individuals each having autonomy or authority? Or is there a difference between autonomy and authority?
No, there isn't. That's a great question. And what it comes down to is the structure. So as I keep going here, I think it'll become self-explanatory. Sure. So in the structure, what they realized, and so let's do a legal derivation, since you like law. The legal derivation of the individual right is the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783 by King George III, basically gave all right, title, and interest to the colonies to the inhabitants. It's never happened before in world human history. Never happened since. that a group of people instantaneously became on the same level as the king. They were all sovereigns, essentially. They all had complete authority over their lives. And in a sovereign relationship, the sovereign is the Most High. So since we're a God-fearing nation based on our belief in God, God is the ultimate authority. We have God's law, we have sovereigns, and then we have sovereign law. So there's gradations of the law. So the sovereigns, or all the people, were the ultimate rulers. So what they did is they sat down, they delegated some of their authority to state constitutions, and then when all the states got together through the representatives, they delegated more, a subordinate amount of authorities to a federal constitution. And that's what the 1787 Constitutional Convention was about, taking what the original states had done and further delegating another layer, and it's a layer subordinate to, not above.
Right, even though today it seems, well, probably more than seems, that the states are subordinate to the federal level.
Yes.
Not the other way around.
And that's not a coincidence. There's a very, very active pattern that was created for that. But just to answer your question, so in the republic that they created it indirect, because what the founders recognized, and I've been studying this for about 45 years, and I come up with something that I've never seen written out before, and I call it the 15-85% rule. And what the 15-85% rule is, if you had a group of people come together, say 100 people, and they were left on their own, within an hour, 15 of those 100 people would be managing the other people.
All right, so in other words, if you had, so if you had 100 people, right, and you put 15 people in charge.
No, you don't. You don't.
Okay.
You don't. So let's say two buses are driving across the desert, and one bus breaks down, and they both pull over, and there happens to be 100 people on the two buses.
Okay.
They're standing there milling around in the middle of the desert. Within an hour, 15 of those will naturally gravitate to the top and start helping people and guiding people and figuring out what's wrong, and the other 85 are just going to stand there and, they're going to wait.
Are they going to follow instructions, the other 85?
Yeah, that's the natural hierarchy that I've discovered in studying ancient civilizations and everything else since the beginning of time. There's a few leaders, and the rest are willing to be followers. The only fundamental thing they want is to be led properly.
Okay.
Now, followers will follow. They have no inclination to create policy, to figure out what to do. They'll be glad to have somebody tell them what to do, but it doesn't take them long to figure out that if what they're being told what to do is not to their benefit, they don't like it. They're not, and here's the irony of it, they won't come up with ways to change it because they're not leaders. That's just not their natural function. They just won't like it.
Okay, so they'll bitch and moan about it, but they won't take a step to try to change it.
Exactly. And the founders understood that. In studying all the ancient civilizations, they got that figured out. So that's why they created the republic the way they did. All indirect rule, a few people managing for the majority. So the way they set it up.
In other words, they weren't trying to create something new. They were just trying to follow what the natural inclination of man was.
Because they knew that was the only hope they had of something sustaining. If you went against the natural order, it's going to fall apart quickly.
Okay.
So that was their hope. The problem was they didn't educate people enough as to what they did, because what they did was very unique. By setting up the bicameral system and then essentially having the two major bodies of the Congress representing specific entities, that was totally unique. Similar to Parliament, but not the same. So the big debate in the Constitutional Convention was big states versus small states. That was the major contention point.
Right, where you get the number of senators, number of the electoral college, and all that stuff.
Exactly. So the way they ended up doing it, by the way, the Constitutional Convention almost fell apart over this. They drug on for over a month arguing about this, and they almost disbanded because the small states wouldn't give in, the big states wouldn't give in. And then I think it was the representative from Massachusetts, I can't remember exactly, but one of them said, what we need to do is have both. So the states will be represented by 2 members. So all the states have 2, big and small. And then all the states, by representation of the people, will have according to their population. So whatever the breakdown was, 25,000, 30,000 per representative in that day, because it's changed. It keeps getting bigger. But anyway, so the Congress was basically states represented and the people represented, the two different bodies that were the ultimate control. The citizens were the ultimate control. Right. So the representatives actually had more power, which is why in the Congress, the representatives, all money bills have to originate in the House. Cannot originate in the Senate. They do it all the time now because they're so far outside of the constitutional bounds, it's like insane.
Right.
But in the original setup, the representatives had the most power because they directly represented the people. But as kind of a check to that, the state governments, who incidentally, they didn't elect them, they chose two from among their membership and sent those two to represent the state.
Yeah, I always thought the state legislators voted for the two senators back in those days.
Correct, before 1913.
Right. So in other words, the state legislature would vote on who the two senators would be.
Correct.
So the Senate was further removed from the people, from the masses, as the founding fathers would probably refer to them as, from the masses, and so you had the check and balance wasn't really so much on the different branches, but it seemed like a check and balance on popular whim.
Exactly right.
Popular passions.
Exactly right.
Where like the seasoned senators who were in for 6 years, not even 2, would be able to, if the House got kind of crazy, the passion of the moment, some issue that came up, the Senate was there to kind of put a check to them to stop them from advancing something stupid.
Exactly, and I mean you're absolutely spot on. And one more intimation of that is that the Senate was still a representative of the people. So pick a state, any state. Let's take one of the original colonies, one of the large ones, Virginia. Very large colony, a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So they probably had 9 representatives. So you could have an issue going on in one corner of Virginia that inflamed several other regions around it, congressional districts. Okay, we'll look at it by district. And you could get that representative. He was a great negotiator, really a good speaker, and he was able to convince his other 7 representatives from his state to really get behind this. But like you say, it was a flash in the pan. It was mostly just emotional energy. It wasn't really substantive. Well, the state is another level of representation of all the people. So the state weighs in, and then they put it out to the other states who have no interest in that, and they all take the much broader, longer view and go, that is a momentary issue. That's not something we really want to make a law around. So you had the states balancing out, just as you said, the individuals. Well, that all changed in 1913.
Right.
I mean, and see, my contention is that the problem here, and it's the problem that the founders recognized, and the reason they tried to set up a government without political parties. And I've studied this. The first recognition of political parties showed up in 1832 on the Federal Registers. Before that, all the elections were just the people's names. Wow. So we went one generation. And I contend, as we were talking earlier, it's because the founders really fell down in educating the people. They did a wonderful job with the Federalist Papers. Right. Of kind of laying out how they wanted to do it and the reasoning behind it. If they would have done a sequel to that after the country was formed and talked about all the issues around the political parties and how the political parties would damage this structure that they created. Right. Because we already have indirect representation, and the political parties are just one more level of indirect representation.
Right. They just make it further removed, and also and then every time you bring another step in, it's like when you buy produce. People probably understand. When you buy produce in the store, if you buy a process, every time you add another step to it, potential for a disease or something to get into it, or salmonella or some other disease. But the same thing, every time you add another step in the level of government, you get the corruption and potential for human nature. Again, back to human nature kicking in, bribery, that kind of stuff. Now let me answer this question, because this issue's been coming up recently, obviously, with the whole Mueller report and everything. Well, the founding fathers had to know that. Like the whole who will guard the guardians argument that Plato pirated from somebody else. But still, what was the founding fathers' view on corruption within government? Like they think it was just inevitable, and they thought they built a good enough system that would be able to deal with that kind of stuff?
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Well, we can all speculate, and I've done a lot of studying on the founding period and the founding fathers. Not that I know them intimately, but I have a sense of what they were trying to do. And they understood human nature. I mean, if you read Washington's farewell address, several places in that address, he addresses the fallacies and the failings of the human ego, the human mind, how we'll succumb to flattery, how we'll succumb to a variety of different enticements. And he told us to guard against that, because he said this prophetically back in 1798, I think was his second final term. That's when the farewell address, and it's on my website, it's on the Sovereign Hope website. He talked about that if the country was going to fail, it would fail from within, not without. And he's exactly right. He's exactly right. Because what the founders recognized was ego and faction, which was very present. We have this, I'm going to digress here for a second. We have this warped view of the United States that, like, somebody waved a magic wand and poof, in 1787, we're this brand new country.
Right.
Well, we were legally, technically a new legal entity, but those people had been living here for 300 years.
Right.
There were several generations of families here, all steeped in the parliamentary tradition, the House of Commons, House of Lords, factions,
Right.
all and severely steeped in someone from several thousand miles away telling them what to do.
Right.
So that was deeply ingrained in them, and mostly what they want to do was shed that. They want to get rid of that. And what the founders recognized was, yeah, you can get rid of that, but you have to be very careful what you let back in.
Right.
And what they recognized, again, was that political parties are bad, all of them, because the political parties have their own agenda. Now, they don't have to, but most of the time they do,
Yeah.
because they're not really accountable to anybody.
Right. They're not elected. You know, they're probably elected by their members or appointed by his members or the guys who run the party. But, you know, there is no accountability to the public in mass. That's why, like, with the last, you know, when Sanders got screwed over by the Clinton people, well, it's a private organization, you know.
The courts have gone back and forth on that. The Supreme Court early on said that they were a private organization, but now they're admitting, I think in 47 or 48, the ruling started to change, and they're now, I don't want to say reluctantly, it's slowly starting to show up in their opinions, let's put it that way, that they are of a public trust. They do have influence. But the problem is, and you just said it, they have no accountability to anybody.
Right.
I'm an Oregon resident, and back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, Senator Bob Packwood, I don't know if you remember him.
Yes.
Big guy,
Yeah.
kind of a philanderer, not a very nice man for what he did. I mean, he was a great senator. He actually did pretty well, but his private life wasn't wonderful. Well, he created a bunch of shenanigans that embarrassed the state of Oregon. And the state of Oregon, a lot of the people in the state wanted to recall him. You know what they found out?
Right.
You can't touch him.
Really?
There's no legal recourse to recall a senator. And it just goes to show you the complete and utter control that the political parties have over the country with absolutely no quid pro quo. They have no accountability.
Wow.
I mean, it's scary.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not something that you want to not something you want to think about much. So in other words, they couldn't recall him. Why? Because he was a federal elected officer?
Because the state of Oregon, the citizens of the state of Oregon have no say over him. He is a federal representative. So, the 17th Amendment did this. They took the states. Now, in the original, let's back up a second here. Let's say pre-1913.
Right.
Okay? If the states did not like how a senator voted, if he didn't vote according to what the state legislature wanted, what their opinion was, they could cancel his vote and recall him.
No kidding.
Yep, absolutely. They
did not know that.
complete control over him. After 1913, through this sleight of hand, and that could be a whole other discussion of how that evolved.
Right.
Have you ever heard of the Populist Revolt?
Yeah, I mean, in the early 1900s.
Actually, it was the late 1800s, after the Civil War,
Okay, late 1800s.
with the huge immigration.
Right. So in other words, people were concerned that, the way I remember from what I learned, is that people were concerned that corporations were buying state legislators to elect the senators they wanted, you know, the big money guys, you know, Standard Oil, those guys. And the cartoons of the time depicted like Standard Oil and all these guys sitting behind their senators on the floor because they paid off the state legislators to to vote the way they wanted to.
Right.
And that's what I remember as the impetus for that.
And
was
that
there something else to that?
Yes, there were several levels. Like everything, it's nothing is ever just black and white, one or two issues. There's a whole bunch of issues that kind of interplay. The public version and the most visible version was the power and who was controlling. So that's one aspect of it.
Right.
But the only way they got that passed was by convincing the people who. There had been let me back up. There was a huge immigration in the 1880s from Europe, Ireland, France, Italy.
Right.
Huge immigration. That's Ellis Island, all of that stuff.
Sure.
So these people showed up, and these people, the corporate people, the Carnegies and the Mellons and the Rockefellers and all those types, took advantage of them. No doubt about it.
They loved it, just like
Yeah.
big corporations today love illegal immigration because it drives down the price of
Exactly.
labor. Yeah.
Exactly. So they loved that, and they didn't take the moral high ground. Here's the bottom line here. It was all about money and power, and they were afraid. Here's where fear shows up. They're afraid that they were going to lose their competitive edge or lose something, but it was all fear-driven. So they took advantage of these people. Well, I studied all this, and I looked at it and went, okay, let's think about this. Again, these people didn't come here in a vacuum. They came from countries, and so you go back and look at their countries. Well, their countries were wildly socialist, heavily regulated.
Right.
That's all they knew. So they brought with them what they knew, and in their minds, more government, more rules, more laws would make it better. So when they proposed changing this, how the Senate was voted on, they went, sure, why not?
Oh, geez.
No one ever even studied it.
Right.
But again, see, here's the 1585 at work. The 85 will pretty much do anything that you convince them. And if you make a really good argument, and that's why a good salesman can sell you something you don't want.
Right.
Because the 85 are going to go, okay, I'll do that. And I really want everybody to know, I'm not denigrating people at all. This isn't categorically putting people. This is natural human nature.
We don't know who the 85 are, so that's fine.
But
You
it's
can't
pretty.
put down somebody we don't know.
It's pretty easy to find out. I mean, you can.
Well, if you're in a group, yeah, you can spot them pretty quick.
Yeah, and see, this is another way. I'll jump ahead here a little bit. This is another way that calling ourselves a democracy really demonizes this 85%. Because in a democracy, everyone is expected to participate. Democracy, right? Group. You're supposed to be part of the group.
Sure.
So if you have a natural tendency to not participate, and someone keeps telling you, you need to study the issues, you need to get out and vote, you need to,
Right.
they pretty soon put their hands over their head and go crawl in a hole. And then the moment they hear something about it, they are so paralyzed about it. It's like they have a boil, and you just keep hitting that boil.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some of that in 2016.
It's human nature. It's never going to go away.
I mean, it got kind of crazy in 2016, people yelling at the sky. But, yeah, I mean, that was the exaggerated version of what normally happens, I guess. People felt, I guess, more relaxed about being openly upset in public than they would have done before. But yeah, you see, right, those. Well, the funny thing is, a lot of those people did participate, and they were still pissed off, and they still acted like children.
Well, there's a disenfranchisement. I'm sorry. That's that visibility. But again, the bottom line is most of these people are very uncomfortable at best. And I'm going to clarify something. Just because one group tends to be leaders and one group tends to be a follower, doesn't mean that follower group is like inept. Some of our most prolific artist types, musicians, painters, even lawyers and firemen are all part of the follower group. They just don't want to be creating all the rules. It's just not in their makeup.
Right.
They are perfectly willing to go along, but again, they have a brain. And if you're trying to sell them something that goes against their common sense or their human nature or their spiritual essence, we haven't talked about that yet, but we all have a sense of guidance of what's right and wrong.
Right.
And when someone's trying to convince them about something that goes against their moral character, they may say yes on the surface, but deep down inside, it's kind of like, I don't think so. And that is a lot of what you're seeing, we saw in the last election cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I had never seen that before. Again, I've been studying politics since, like, say, 73. My first election I really covered in my head was 76. I've never seen people react like that before, not even in 08, when you thought the real lunatics would be out. But no, the 16 though, it's like Jesus. It was crazy.
So I have 3 filters that I put it on my website that people need to be aware of, because this happens for everything in life. There's 3 filters we process through. The first one is faith or fear. is the information we're taking in, and in our mind, are we viewing it from a place of fear or faith? Like, are we feeling so cornered and afraid and not sure? When that information comes in, we're going to react to it entirely different than if we are in a place of faith, where we feel comfortable and trusting and caring. Okay, first one. So, and the second one is generational filter. At any given time in human history, there's 3 generations in the power, if you will, in the game, in the play.
Right. I mean, you have, like, say, your Trump generation.
Well, we have baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer. Then there's Generation Xers, and then there's millennials. That's the 3 in play right now.
I'm born in 65, so I'm kind of like...
You're right on the edge.
Right on the edge,
yep.
Right.
Yep.
So, right, those are 3 people in power, and they kind of go back and forth about how much power they have.
Well, it's not even so much that. I mean, think of generation as a class. Like, to make it really simple, everybody can relate to this. We all graduated at certain years, so we're in the class of.
Okay.
Okay, so in that class, we all had experiences. Your class could have been involved in some kind of political stuff, some kind of agricultural thing, some kind of who knows what. But those are your personal experiences that group basically had together. They've got that in common. So you broaden that out to the generational group. So us baby boomers, we had the Vietnam War, we had the OPEC oil things, we had several things that marked our generation that impacted us, whether we liked it or not.
Right.
The Kennedy assassination, the Cuban War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. These things, we didn't have anything to do with them, but they were in our time and they affected us. What we thought, how we see things. Well, Generation Xers, same thing. They have certain things in their group that were big. The Twin Towers.
Right.
Major in their generation.
Major in anybody's time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it affected all 3, but
right.
But each group takes it different. Our group would see it one way, they would see it, and now the millennials show up, and they have an entirely different take. And see, my contention is, as a baby boomer, I mean, I'm here to apologize to the Generation Xers and the millennials, because we, the baby boomers, did a horrible job of teaching values and morals. We started off in a rage. I mean, we were like a house of fire. We were against the Vietnam War, and I am a military veteran, by the way, combat veteran. But we were against the war, we were against corruption, we were against big government. And then about 5 to 6 years later, the baby boomer generation folded like a cheap suit. And
became like, what do they call them, helicopter parents? Where like they constantly protect their children over and over and over again, so they can't deal with like any kind of confrontation.
Well, some.
Okay.
But I'm just talking about what was going on.
Right.
As a group, our group basically walked away from all of the idealistic things we were doing and jumped right into the fray, because at that point the country was booming. We had technology booms, we had oil boom, we had industrial boom. I mean, we were booming. So we just threw all that aside and we dove in to make money. And what did our kids see? Not very much Mommy and Daddy.
No. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me just put the announcement on again. All right, just let you know we're here live at the Pahrump Wild West Extravaganza. I'm talking to Gerard Cote, Chief Hope Officer, and it's an educational thing. And we're here discussing the constitutional founding fathers in different generations. And we'll continue our conversation again live from the Pahrump Wild West Extravaganza with Gerard Cote. Mr. Cote, continue, please.
Okay. So where we left off, I was talking about the different generations. So the Generation Xers didn't quite raise themselves, but we were headed that way. Money was king, stuff was king. We needed more and more and more of it. Status was important.
Right.
So kids were raised by this burgeoning industry called television, and cable television showed up. Now instead of having 3 channels, there were 300.
Right, so your contention is that the baby boomers, both parents went to work, not so much because they needed to, but because they wanted more stuff.
Well, but see, that's the perspective. When you're in a fear-based perspective, it looks like need. We need to have 2 cars. We need to have this. We need to have that. I need to have that coat. We need to go on vacation. I mean, and I'm not saying all of that is bad. Again, this isn't condemning anything. But when we create a psyche, the American dream, let's put it this way, the American dream blossomed from having your own home and having control in your job and your future to this huge blown up version of monster houses, 7-car garages, and I'm not saying that's everywhere in the country, but
sure.
The general thing was just more and more and more stuff. So the Generation Xers grew up with that. That's their milestone.
Well, right, like you said, their parents were absent. They weren't. There wasn't one parent, there when they were going to school in the morning. Wasn't one parent there when they got home in the afternoon. There wasn't somebody there like make sure they're going over their homework with them. Maybe making sure that you do your homework, but so exhausted from their work day, really couldn't sit down with the kid and have enough patience or time to be able to any kind of nurturing or anything like that.
All of that.
And hence you end up with this generation. Now, the generation that's like graduated college, like say 6 years ago. What generation?
That's the millennials.
Millennials. Okay.
So let's continue now. Let's go to the millennials. So the millennials are born of the Generation Xers. They see their parents in the same groove. Both people working, horribly in debt, lots and lots of stuff, frazzled, afraid, not sure what's going to happen every minute while they're sitting there awash in all this stuff. That's what their input is. And they're again raising themselves.
So are they rejecting then? I mean, it seems like every generation rejects their parents, but are they like really going out of their way to reject their parents' ideals or their grandparents' ideals, or what are they doing?
Wow, that's a great question, and it jumps us to an entirely different topic. See, all these topics are all interrelated, but they can be standalone. So going back to the issue of what caused the founding of the country was a deep abiding faith in God, and that the belief that what they were trying to achieve was of value, was worthwhile. And if you look at the actual Revolutionary War, several of those battles should never have been won by the revolutionaries. The British, and with all their brought in the Hessians and all of the conscripted troops, had them outgunned like 10-1. And yet we still won it because, and most people contend, and I agree, there was a divine providence at work. So there was a spiritual basis for this country, how it was formed, based on trust, based on indirect rule, trusting others to do it for you well. Mm-hmm. And when we went away from that, we started turning our back on that spiritual energy. And I have a paper on there. It's the one that's published in this month's Pahrump Valley Life magazine.
Oh yeah, let me just, Mr. Cote has a article published in the Pahrump Valley Life. I'm pretty sure they're online if they're not.
I know that actually they're not. It's
they're not.
It's for people here in Pahrump.
Well, they should be online. But, anyway.
But no, they can go to my website and it's on the website.
Oh, okay, hold on. I'm going to read his website out. Let's see, is this your email address or your website?
No, the website is www.sovereignhope.org.
Okay, that's www.sovereignhope.org, and you'll be able to find that article there and several others. But please continue, Mr. Cote.
So the Faith or Fear article basically talks about how when we are in a mode of faith, we can do great things. And over the years, we basically walked away from that. And so one of the things I talk about in this article is that as human beings, we're not a human body, we're a human being. Our human being essentially has two energy sources available to it. One is our spiritual essence, and one is our intellectual essence. So the finite body is an energy source. It creates energy through fat, protein, carbohydrates, chemical equations, all that stuff, but we create energy. So the mind is an extension of the brain. So that electrochemical energy essentially is an energy source, but it's finite. If our health goes bad, if things happen to us, that energy can wane. And that's another whole story about all the food issues and the toxicity and the chronic diseases. But anyway, so the other energy is our spiritual energy. Well, that's limitless. That's infinite. And we attribute that to faith, love, the Almighty, all knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that's available to us. But the trick is we have to basically tap into it. Our intellectual energy is there. That's by default. It's there. You wake up in the morning, your brain's working.
Right.
You want spiritual energy? You actually have to kind of quiet your brain down, quiet your mind down, and bring it in. And you can bring it into any degree you want. And I contend that is energetic balance. Energetic balance is when we balance our spiritual energy with our intrinsic physiological energy.
It's funny because this morning I was having a conversation with someone, actually Ray Grant, the new chairman of our Republican, Nye County Republican Central Committee. And, you know that old saying, you look at somebody who's kind of like, messed up, you say, there but for the grace of God goes me. And what I've interpreted that to mean was we all have the grace of God. Go ahead. The grace of God is given to all of us by God. God gives us His grace, but you can choose not to accept it, or you can ignore it, or you cannot look for it, and then you don't. The grace is there, but you're not accessing it.
That's right.
So when the saying means, like, when I've always interpreted it to mean like, there but for the grace of God goes me, is there but for the fact that I've accepted the grace of God, this person hasn't. I would be just like him. If I didn't accept the grace of God,
Right.
I'd be just like that guy over there
Right.
who's committing crimes, addicted to the drugs,
Something. We don't know what causes that. But typically when someone doesn't access that spiritual energy and they rely only on their intellectual energy, they tend to make bad choices, because here's the deal. In our intellectual vein, the mind essentially is a protective device. It's here to keep us alive. So it's always looking for threats to that. It's always looking for something that's going to hurt us. So the mind naturally is, I don't want to say fearful, that's a little too strong, but it's cautious. The mind's always cautious. So if we get that caution stimulated constantly, we get into a state that I call low-grade fight or flight. It's not to the point where your adrenaline's surging and you want to get up and run for your life, but you're like, what just happened? What's going on? And when we stay in this low-grade state of fight or flight, it physiologically has an impact on us, because we're triggering the body to act different. So in a low-grade state of fight or flight, we're using up our alkaline minerals. We become unbalanced physiologically. And that will take a toll on the body over a period of time. So this happens on so many different levels, because we are a human being, which is an energy source. We're a replication of an energy source.
Give me a second. I saw my phone just go, just kind of flickered on and off.
Oh.
So, okay. So basically, where you're in this low state of fight or flight, you're using up energy.
We're misdirecting our energy, because
Misdirecting it.
when we go into fight or flight, what we've already told our body to do is get ready for a fight. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know how big it's going to be, but get ready for it.
Right. In other words, you want to, I see it, in my profession, but also my personal life. It's like you call keeping your head on a swivel. Like, okay, so you feel like something bad's going to happen.
You're not sure where.
Right. And usually like in the morning when I do my morning prayers, if I hey, I'm anxious about something. I don't know what it is, but hey, can you help me out with this one this morning? If something happens, try to help me stay focused. Stay alert. Be aware. That kind of thing. And so I guess I'm misdirecting energy that way, because maybe instead of directing on what my tasks are for that day, I'm worried about what's coming up behind me.
No, that's completely perfectly normal. And let me share something with you. Imagine God being this benevolent grandfather, just the nicest old man you could, or old woman. I don't want to say woman, lady, old lady.
Okay. We'll stay with man. This is the conservative side.
Yeah.
I'm fine with God being a man.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Right, fine.
I just don't want anybody to get rubbed the wrong way for no reason. And that would be a silly reason.
No, people who listen to the show won't get rubbed the wrong way.
Good.
Don't worry about it.
So here's this benevolent person who is the nicest guy to you in the world. And every time he sees you, he says, hey, how you doing? What can I do for you? Let me know what I can do to help you. And you've got this need for something, whatever it is, to take care of your little worry.
Yeah.
And you show up to him and you say, I've got this worry. He goes, hey, tell you what, don't worry about it. I'm going to make sure you're covered. And so that'd be great, right?
Yeah.
But an hour later, you come back and go, I got this worry. I don't know what to do about it. I already told you. Don't worry about it. I got it.
Right.
So imagine coming back to them about 10 or 15 or 20 times every night, every morning. I got this worry. And so what I share with people is we already have all the healing, all the love, all the caring that we could ever stand. It's already been given to us. All we have to do is accept it. And the best way to accept it is by being thankful for it. So what I'm going to share with you is, if that nag shows up, your response should be, thank you for giving me the understanding that this is already taken care of. Done. And what you've done is you've redirected your energy in a very positive way. You're not staying in the state of doubt, because what did it create? It created a state of doubt in you. You're going, I got this nagging thing that something's going to happen. Well, you stay there.
Meanwhile, you're not taking care of any kind of business.
Well, and so you've redirected your intellectual energy and your physiological energy, because now your body's in the low-grade fight or flight response. It's looking around. It's getting ready. So the way the body gets ready, it creates acid. Acid is what the muscles use for energy. So when you put it in a low-grade state, it says start. It's like sand or collecting ammunition.
Right.
So you've directed your energy away from healing and health to getting ready.
Right.
It can only do one or two things. I tell people my best example is a single pole double throw switch. And I'll just paint a picture since we're on the radio. Up in the center is off. You push it one way, it's on. You push it the other way, it's on. So you have two ons and an off in the middle. Mm-hmm. Our body works the same way. When we trip it into low-grade fight or flight, all the energy now goes to be preparing for the fight. Well, not all, a majority.
Right.
Because we still have to breathe and muscles have to move. But as far as healing and inflammation processes, that energy is basically taken away from that. When we go to the other side, when we're in faith and trust and we're comfortable and we believe,
right.
No logical, intellectual basis for believing other than just believing that it's going to be okay. The moment we do that, our body's at rest and he can go about and do its business. So there's huge implications physiologically as well as emotionally and intellectually.
Wow.
So it's really important that we understand that. And when you start looking at our country from the beginning, they had that. Incredible odds against them. They should have never won. They did. Why? It was supposed to be. It was time. It was time for that ideology to show up in man's consciousness. And it did in a big way. And as we were talking earlier, would it last? One generation.
Yeah.
Because they did a poor job of sharing what they did.
Well, considering how uneducated the majority of the population was in 1787, how like we were talking about earlier, they didn't have the phone. Like, hey, everybody get on Facebook today. How could they have accomplished that? I mean, you had people in this country. A lot of them were illiterate.
Yes, and that has nothing to do with intelligence.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well,
I'm just saying, how would you have spread the word?
Actually, these are some great things you're bringing up. I mean, I am enjoying talking with you. If you look back at the literacy rate of the country in the Revolutionary period, it's actually quite high.
Really?
Yes.
No kidding.
Yep. It was actually quite high. I think our literacy rate today is much lower, and you combine that with our lack of faith and trust, our cynicism, we're in a much worse position.
Well, let me ask you this question. Why, if you had a decent literacy rate where you could have spread the word, and obviously these guys knew how to print stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Paine, obviously famous during the Revolutionary War, and right before, how come they didn't reach out to try to educate? Were they just busy trying to form a country? They said, hey, they'll figure it out later? Or what do you think?
I wish I knew. I mean, I've got a lot of Thomas Jefferson's writings. I've got Madison's writings, and I kind of glean through them for looking for clues. Every once in a while I stumble on things. Yes, they were very busy. And part of their busyness was them trying to create a government that wasn't faction-oriented. Because, again, just because we became a country doesn't mean that factions went away.
Right.
And actually, I believe they got stronger. Now imagine this.
Oh wait, I'm gonna pull your mic up a little. There you go.
Oh, it's falling.
Oh, you know what? Here, you should be able to tighten it right.
Yeah. Okay, it's tightened up now.
There you go.
What was I saying?
The factions.
Oh, the factions. Yeah.
Right.
The founders were trying really hard to reorient people and get them out of the faction mode. But again, it was so deeply ingrained, and because, again, if they would have had a mere set of writings similar to the Federalist Papers, said, okay, we created a republic. This is how we did it. This is why we did it. We understand that a lot of you don't care about politics, and we set it up so that we will put trustworthy people in place, and you get a chance to elect a trustworthy person to represent you. That's your choice.
Right.
In your district, you get to choose somebody who you believe will represent you fairly and is moral. Because that's the key to all this. It's morality. If we can't be trusted to send somebody and let them do their business without having somebody look over their shoulders every minute, what's the point?
Right.
And that's what's gone. So that didn't happen. I guess there was an assumption because they were too busy or something. I really don't know the answer. But history bears us out. Hindsight's always 20/20, right?
Right.
Yeah. So looking back, we can see that when the founders, and so here's the generational aspect. Franklin was the oldest to sign the Declaration. He was like in his 80s. But a lot of them were in their 50s, 40s. Some of them, Hamilton was what? Hamilton was 30-something, I think.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys didn't live past the early 1800s. I think Washington, when did he die? Like
Washington and Jefferson died within a few days of each other, and that was in, oh gosh, when was that? I know this. Was it 1828?
1828?
I think it was.
Okay.
But I mean, here's the thing though. It's not that they would necessarily die, but at some point they get older and they're out of the race or the running.
Right.
They're just not doing it anymore.
New generation is taking over.
Exactly.
Right.
So, and I view a generation as 30-year increments. And so here's another interesting thing. When I first got into this, I wrote a book called The 5-Minute Citizen back in the 80s about how people can manage their government and still have a life. And it was the takeoff of the 1-minute manager.
Okay.
You know,
okay.
Yeah. So how do you do these key things to manage your day and make it all work without being overwhelmed? So the 5-Minute Citizen was the same idea. And my contention was that we could figure this out if we wanted to, but I missed several key points. What we've done is we've allowed ourselves to be distracted because another difference between the founding period and ours, obviously, they didn't have electricity.
Right.
I mean, Franklin was playing around with kites and electricity, but they didn't have the distractions that we do. The distractions that we have today are overwhelming.
Right. I mean, we're all on our phone. I mean, all the time.
And,
there's always some new information coming through.
And what do all those distractions have in common? The commonality of all of them is they make us feel, whether it's true or not, they make us feel overwhelmed. Like there's so much to do. Most people, I'm going to guess, 85-90% of people in this country, I'm going to guess, and I'm just pulling this off the top of my head, I have no statistics to back it up, when their feet hit the floor in the morning, they are overwhelmed. What do I got to do today? Oh my
Right.
God, I didn't get this done yesterday. Da, 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 da. And I find this kind of funny, but it's actually very serious. We have created so many time-saving devices in our lifetime.
Right.
Do we feel any less push?
Right.
We feel more.
More. Right.
We're overwhelmed. Why? That's an intellectual thing, because here's the thing. This is another interesting thing. The human mind, like you and I are sitting here talking, we occasionally glance at each other, but as we're sitting here, our eyes are taking in, our ears are taking in, our brains are voracious for information. They just love stuff. More stuff. Feed me, more stuff. Well, that's okay till it gets out of control.
Yeah.
And when we don't discipline our minds to stay on track, like you talk to people, I do a lot of health healing work with people because I believe that personal health is an extension of national health. And if you're sick and you have a lot of chronic disease, you have no desire to do anything.
Well, kind of before you get too far ahead from what you just said, so there's people feeling overwhelmed with information. I mean, obviously, I don't want you to make any generalities, but is that a decent explanation for alcohol addiction, drug addiction? Is that people are so overwhelmed with information being processed, it's almost like an autistic child. This stuff is just coming at them, and people just have to find some way to shut it off. Like, okay, I got to stop the information from coming. So, drugs, just it shuts everything down. You get to live in this moment, not 12 other moments. And what do you got to do for the rest of your day and this week and tomorrow and pay the mortgage and everything else? Same thing with alcohol. Are people looking for a way to just shut the information off and possibly shut it off a lot more now than they used to earlier? So maybe we have a higher opioid drug addiction rate today than we even had just 10 years ago.
Okay, so and I do have an answer for you, but let me throw this out. Sure. How come everybody isn't that way? How come only...
I think it goes to your 1585 rule.
To a degree. That's one of the factors. That's exactly right. The followers are a lot more susceptible because they are more sensitive to being overwhelmed.
Right.
The other major tenet, and I mean, there's so many topics we're covering here, and each one of these is a topic by themselves.
Yeah.
The food we eat. The food we eat is lacking nutrients. The food we eat is so corrupted and so toxic. And it's not just that it doesn't have nutrients. We've now introduced Roundup, glyphosate. I'm sure you guys have heard of it.
What, Roundup, the insecticide?
Yeah.
You mean that big scandal that went on with them?
Not a big scandal. It's ongoing.
Oh, okay.
Roundup is a glyphosate. A glyphosate is essentially here's a little chemistry. So glycine is one of the amino acids. Glycine is the second largest amino acid group in our bodies. In most living organisms, a plant, a shrub, a dog, a human being, they all have glyphosate as a major part of their amino acid structure in their body. Glyphosate is a corruption of glycine. So when you introduce glyphosate in the body, it corrupts the glycine amino acid, and that's what shuts the growth down. That's what kills a plant not instant, but fairly instantly.
Sure.
Happens in a human body because we're much larger than that plant. It's like poisoning somebody a little bit at a time. Over 3 weeks, if you give somebody opium or arsenic over 3 weeks, pretty soon they start getting woozy and fuzzy and headachy. It doesn't happen all at once.
Okay.
Just over time, they start because it has a cumulative effect. Well, so does the glyphosate. So my contention is these poor kids are eating food that's tainted and toxic. It's affecting their physiology, which goes directly to the brain. Because brain physiology is a function of human physiology. And I'm giving you just really the short answer. I can go on for like an hour to explain all this, but the bottom line is when we allow our physiology to come down, our energy drops off. And as our energy drops off, the intellectual part of us, the protective part, gets more on alert because it's feeling behind.
So, I mean, again, this kind of extrapolates to a big generality. So would that explain kind of like almost the paranoia of this generation, where they're afraid of, you know, like, for instance, like, I mean, today it's Trump, tomorrow's going to be somebody else, who cares? It's just Trump happens to be the guy in front of people. So, like, they're paranoid about Donald Trump. They're paranoid about this. They're paranoid about that. And it leads to these bizarre reactions. Then when you try to tell them, hey, don't be so paranoid, of course, that you tell somebody who's paranoid that, they get even more paranoid and more freaked out. They get very combative.
Well, it can escalate to that, yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, you see that just from, like, this show's point of view and other shows on YouTube, conservative sites, you know, like going to college campuses. You know, I was at the University of California, Riverside back in the 80s, and I use this story quite often. And there was a professor on campus, a very liberal professor, and he said, and we used to do this all the time on campus, they would hold a debate on different issues. The one night I remember, and I used it a lot, was we had a debate on abortion. And it was like 70% for abortion, 30% against abortion. I was part of the 30%. Mm-hmm. But one thing, when I look back, the professor never ever had to say to anybody, hey, don't interrupt Carl. Hey, don't be rude. Hey, no, don't be yelling at him. Hey, don't throw that egg at him. You know, and nobody had to escort me to my car that night.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
And now today, you get a conservative commentator come onto a college campus and try talking about abortion, or a professor trying to hold a real debate on abortion with two sides presented. It can't happen. I mean, literally, physically, cannot happen. People are going to get physically hurt. You know, like, is that go to maybe part of the explanation as to that kind of reaction by this younger generation?
Okay, so we're jumping around a lot, but at some point I think this may all connect because it is all connected. So the younger generation, again, is not a human body with a mind. It's a human being, okay? So a human being means that we all show up here with gifts and talents, okay? Some people show up and they're naturally artists. Well, that's part of the gift that they were given through their soul.
Yeah, let me see.
I thought, oh.
Is that a flat screw? Hold on a sec.
I got my Swiss Army knife.
No, you sure? Okay, because I got it right behind me.
After I get that out of the way. Yeah, there is a screw right there on the side.
I think it keeps loosening up. Keeps loosening up there.
There we go.
Right.
Oh yeah, much better.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so being this whole energetic being, I absolutely contend, and I don't know if you knew this, but one of the primary source of death in millennials is suicide.
No, I
They
didn't
have
know
a very
that.
high suicide. It's so sad. And my contention, and this is why I apologize to them, because no one's ever given them attention or respect. Most people look at them and go, oh, will you stop whining? Will you stop complaining? Will you stop, stop, rather than...
And there's gunfire. Everybody down on the ground, down on the ground, down. Just kidding.
Yeah. Anyway, the millennials, I believe, and this could be another whole tangent, but I'll just say this. The millennials are a much more sensitive, emotional generation than the Xers or baby boomers.
Okay.
they show up with this emotional sensitivity into all of this chaos, and the chaos is malnutrition. A lot of the food they eat is poor. I have on my blog site, which is connected to the website, I have a paper that I wrote after the shooting in Florida, and I contend it's a long-term problem. Most of the kids in that school and the kid that did this are malnourished. And people look at me, oh, you're crazy. They've got all the food in the world, but what's the quality of the food?
Right.
And if it's got toxins in it, what's it doing to their brains?
Yeah.
You can track, and I follow a lot of some of the leading research scientists in the country. I'm not just making a lot of this stuff up. And there's a doctor, and I do everything by generation. Since I have that filter, I use it. It makes things so much easier.
Right.
A doctor who's a Generation Xer, triple board certified, and he's been studying glyphosate. And what he found out was it wreaks havoc on the gastro tract, which immediately allows toxins going to your bloodstream and go to your brain. Your brain's your largest user of oxygen and nutrients in the body. So if it's the largest user and you've got a lot of toxins, it goes to the brain. Well, he's charted graphically, this is scientific stuff, the increase in ADHD, all the mental disorders in children, with the rise in the use of glyphosate. They track together.
Damn. Well, okay, so I've really not been following this story. So, I mean, are they pulling this damn thing off the market? Or what's
No, I mean, Monsanto is huge. Monsanto was just bought by Bayer. Bayer is one of the largest chemical companies in the world. They're based out of Germany. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're up against it now. And if you look at the world situation, there's a lot of countries in Europe that have already banned glyphosate from their countries, not even allowed. But there's so much of it. I mean, if you look at the tonnage of this stuff that's been sprayed out, it's staggering. It's staggering. And Monsanto, I mean, I had a friend buy some the other day, and I told him, please don't do that. He bought a gallon of it.
Wow.
Here locally in town. You know what they sold that gallon for?
How much?
$54 for a gallon of this stuff.
Wow. And,
you know, this is concentrated, but when farmers buy it, they're buying the concentrate.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, I don't know this, but it's like most pharmaceuticals. I'm guessing it cost Monsanto maybe 10 cents a gallon to make it.
Wow.
I mean, again, it's going to be pennies. It's not going to be anywhere like $20 or $30.
Right.
It's going to be negligible. So it's because it's an extraction. So anyway, but this is huge. There's lawsuits that are going on in the country, and they're winning. People are dying from this stuff. It's affecting people. And there's hundreds of lawsuits stacked up. But, you know, like I tell people, we don't need legislation for this. We just need people to be educated about it. Because if I told you that your kids were going to be damaged or your grandkids were going to be damaged, would you use it?
No.
I mean, we just need to get the word out. But the media, we have this homogenized media. I don't watch much TV. But every once in a while I'll scroll through the channels just for fun.
Yeah.
Whatever they're doing on ABC, NBC, and CBS on the national news is within 5 seconds of each other. The stories, the content, the time. It's like scary.
Right.
It's like they got one guy, it was like the Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah.
Guy's in there, you know, editing it out. Oh, you can say this. No, you can't say that. It's so scripted that this message, so I love things like what you're doing.
Well, thanks.
This podcast, YouTubing, we need to get people out. Do you know what turned the tide in the revolution?
What?
The pamphleteers.
Oh, Thomas Paine and guys.
The pamphleteers wrote their little stuff and distributed them to the town's commons and the taverns. They had newspapers. New York had its published newspaper. Boston had its published newspapers. Guess what they were publishing? The King stuff.
Right.
The pamphleteers put out the other information. Today it's the internet.
Right. Which is being terribly restricted toward a certain political point of view, unfortunately.
Not really. Not really. You can say whatever you want. It has to be responsible.
Yeah.
It should be responsible anyway.
Well, there have been people that have been banned or their sites taken down or demonetized. Some people do this for a living. I don't. But some people do this for a living. And they've had their sites demonetized. I mean, just straight guys all the way across the board. Non-inflammatory, nothing. They use humor and satire, but we don't want to start banning humor and satire. We might as well all go home. So, I mean, that is happening now. That is a real thing.
Oh, no, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Yeah. And we still have other opportunities. There's still opportunities out there.
Yeah.
But like in this faith or fear argument that I put in there, what it comes down to is we've got a despotic party-controlled, sorry to say the word party, but it's true, but we got a despotic party-controlled government that has basically taken it hostage away from the American people, that are raining edicts down on us unilaterally. You have no choice. They just show up.
Right.
And that because it's been co-opted on so many levels. And now I hear some of these young candidates that are running for the 2020, they want to get rid of the Electoral College.
Right, which is great. Yeah.
Well, they have no idea what it is.
Well, they have no idea what will happen.
Well, I mean, no, the way that the Electoral College has been so corrupted. I mean, okay, so the original Electoral College was a mirror of the Congress. The stipulation was, though, that you could not be involved in government in any way. So it was community leaders, they could be church leaders, they could be anybody of influence, because every community has a couple people. Again, here's the 15%. This is the 15% in action. They're the ones that pay attention, know what's going on, and you couldn't talk them into something. You get somebody, one of the 85%ers, you can say, well, I'll give you this if you do that. Okay, I'll do that.
Right.
But the 15%ers were who the founders were trying to attract. They didn't say you had to be, but that's who they attracted.
Right.
Those people naturally rose into those positions. But they mirrored the number of seats in the Congress,
Right.
so it'd be the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
And they voted to pick the president. Because, again, they couldn't be hoodwinked or bought off.
Right.
And it was messy. It was messy in that you had a lot of factions going, like a certain part of the country like this guy. Well, the other part of the country has never heard of that guy. And so they'd have to go through a few votes to kind of winnow it down, but then they would finally get down to the good candidates. So it took a little time.
Yeah.
And I've told this to people, if we had that same consensus form of a citizen-run government today, they might pass 5 bills a year because it would take that long to come to consensus.
Right.
Rather than majority. And I'd like people, wouldn't you like it if they only created 5 new laws in a year?
It was funny. I remember during the 90s, I think it was, like in Italy, they couldn't get anything done and the economy was booming. And it was like, well, gee, the government hasn't really got anything done and the economy's just going off on its own. Right. That's kind of funny.
Yes,
So I tell you what, I'm going to wrap this one up.
Okay.
And I just want to thank Gerard Cote. And if you want to check out his website, I definitely will be checking it out myself. It's www.sovereignhope.org. And this guy, I would ask Gerard, I'll be definitely calling you for like some television, not television, like telephone interviews during the week. Like I do a weekly call-in show.
Okay.
And I'd like to do that. And I'll go ahead and put a link. I'll put a link in the description page to your website.
Thank you.
On this video. And, is this a good number to get a hold of you, Matt?
Yes, and for anybody else, for anybody else, please go to the website. The whole point of this is educational. I'm not trying to sway anybody, but I think we need to know what we should have had before we abandon it.
I think it's an excellent idea. All right, Mr. Cote, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the event today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye. You're good. All right, I'm going to finish up. All right, that was Gerard Cote. Please check out his website. That's www.sovereignhope.org. And I will go ahead and put that description in the link, so after it posts up to YouTube, you'll be able to see it. All right, thanks, Guy, for Carl's opinion. This is Carl, live from the Pahrump Wild West Extravaganza. Sorry, I've been here 3 days, and it's starting to wear. But anyway, it's been a great event. Met a lot of people, gave out a lot of business cards, a lot of buzz around here about Donald Trump and about the 2020 election. So remember, people, get out to vote. And I'll probably be doing a live stream later tonight, and we'll be back on this week for sure. All right, guys, have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.